We're going to begin this morning with some words from Hamlet.
Giants now, your gambles, the songs, the flashes of merriment that will want to have the whole table on a roll.
Good morning and welcome to all of you to this special celebration of the life of James Edward Searle. My name is the Reverend Danielle Hemsworth Smith, and I am the minister here amongst the incredible community that is Paddington Uniting Church. On behalf of my church community, I want to welcome you here. As many of you will know, for Christian people, a church is not the building, but actually the gathering of God's people. As those made uniquely in the image of God, you are God's people. Everyone is always welcome here in this place. To you, Jim's family and friends, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to share this day with you. And on behalf of our worshipping community, I want you to know that we are holding you in our prayers. Chris, Jim's wife and partner, has asked me to let you all know that she has been comforted to feel the huge support as several people have said to her and written to her. She feels wrapped in the love of her families, both her personal families and her guild family, to which Jim gave so much of his life. I just need to take a moment to remind you that this is an unusual funeral, of course, because we are in unusual times. We are gathered together not just here in this place, but with other people in their lounge rooms and their homes through virtual technology. I am deeply sad that this has to be the case. But I want to take the opportunity to remind you that connections of love and grief are much deeper than just physical presence. They are boundless, they are endless, and they stretch right through time and space. For those needing to use a bathroom, on more practical matters, there is a toilet just to the rear. And I would ask you to remember to just take a moment to make sure your mobile phones are switched to silent. Family and friends, you have come together today because you loved Jim. Today we will celebrate his life. Here we will mourn him leaving us. We will lament his unfinished work. We will honour his life and his death. You will comfort one another. We come here believing that all human life is valuable, that all people are made in the image of God, and that the love and hope found in each of us lives on. We come believing that Jim's life, which we celebrate today, is joined in the great journey of all human journeys. The gifts that he gave us all are never ever lost, because they will live on as part of us beyond the journey of life. We're going to enter a moment of prayer. In the Christian church, prayer has many, many names. Contemplation, meditation, centering, and it takes many forms. At this time, I invite you to simply enter a moment of stillness as you bring all of yourself to this space, so that we can together begin this process of saying goodbye, surrounded by the love of God and by one another. Let us be still in the presence of God through prayer. Creating God, we give thanks for the gift of life. Today, we give thanks especially for the gift of Jim's life, a gift to us and to so many others. Loving God, we give thanks for the gift of love, for Jim's love, for creativity, for the full wonder of human relationships, the ability to know and to be known, to accept one another and to be accepted. Gracious God, we give thanks for the gift of grace, for tolerance and understanding, for the ability to forgive and to be forgiven, for opportunities to let go of the past and to make new beginnings that are just and fair and inspire human flourishing. We give thanks for the opportunity to find deep peace in our lives. May our memories of Jim be filled with joy and laughter and the deep peace that surpasses understanding. Ever-present God, receive our prayers. Amen. We're going to listen to some music, the silver stars in the sky. I'm going to invite Julie to bring us a poetry reading by Bruce Dorr called Presences. Julie is Jim's first granddaughter.
This, I would say, love life for what is always beyond you. The perfume of a woman who is gone just as you entered the room. The ripple on the bright pool of the fish already swimming elsewhere. The dog sleeping on the warming lap. The smile on the face that is turned ever so slightly away from you. No insult intended, so that you are never sure whether what you saw ever really happened. Woman, fish, dog, smile, until the very last when you know the pencil falls blunted.
Several people are going to bring their memories of Jim for us today. First, we have Jim's brother, Bob.
My brother Jim. Jim was 2 and a bit years older than me, and for almost 30 years we shared a bedroom at Mum and Dad's house at Brightonley Sands. When we were old enough, we often travelled into the city by bus to see live shows and even live-to-air radio shows before the advent of TV, with actors in evening dress around a microphone and sound effects people on stage ringing telephone bells and slamming doors and so on, and a person holding up a big laugh or applause sign. We went to different high schools, then Jim went on to Sydney Uni to study architecture, while I did an apprenticeship and trade course at Tech and did National Military Service. Soon after Jim graduated, the Menzies government instigated a credit squeeze, and Jim had trouble finding a job in Sydney because of the building downturn. But he managed to get a job at an architect's office in Goulburn. While he was living in Goulburn, he visited our dad's cousin Keith Jordan's family in Canberra and became interested in amateur theatre due to Auntie Barbara's involvement in a repertory theatre there. When he returned to Sydney, it must have been around the time he became involved in the group which became the Guild Theatre, led by Hazel Plant. In the late 60s, he set off on a world working tour. His first stop was Hawaii, which he likened to a cross between Bondi Beach and a Parramatta Road car yard strip. He then worked in Canada for a short time before crossing into the USA. His arrival in New York coincided with the shooting of Martin Luther King, which had brought black protesters into the street. His bus was attacked before he eventually got to his hotel, where he stayed for approximately 2 weeks and did not venture outside till it was time to leave for the airport. So he did not see any shows, museums or galleries as he had planned. He then travelled to England, where, armed with an introductory letter from Prime Minister Harold Holt, he attended a royal garden party at Buckingham Palace and met Princess Margaret. He worked for a short time in London. It was the height of the Cold War when he visited divided Germany, and Berlin railway station, which served east and west. He almost walked into East Germany and was turned back by border guards. Then he went on to Moscow, where people in the street wanted to buy his jeans or any other Western-style clothes he could spare. He spent some time on the Greek island of Mykonos, where he did some writing. His final stop was India, where he spent a couple of weeks and lost a lot of weight. And the last thing he did was get a made-to-measure suit tailored. I don't think he was ever able to wear it when he got back home and was reintroduced to Mum's cooking. He reacquainted himself with the Illawarra Theatre Guild, where he met and fell in love with Christine Norris. They were married in May 1970 with me as best man, and in the meantime I had met and fallen in love with Christine Sedgman, and we were married in December of the same year with Jim as my best man. The rest is history to be told by the younger generations. We'll all miss you, Jim. Thank you.
It's taken us quite a while to come to terms with the death of my husband, Jim, whom you all knew as Jim, one or two as James. It was very sudden, so this is, and I didn't write this till about 10 o'clock last night. And so it's probably a mishmash of thoughts and bound to be far too long. And had he been near me, he would have said, "Cut it, lovey, cut it." This funeral, I think, is very like Jim. Very different, very alternate, and trying to find its way a bit, because under COVID it is so difficult to run a funeral where you have to actually invite people and then wait for the next response and invite a few more people. So it's been extremely difficult on all of us. There are friends of my children and my grandchildren that would have been like to have been asked, and there are friends we've had for years and years. So I just warn you about that. Jim would have been 82 on the 10th of September. Jim and I met, as Bob indicated, at the Guild Theatre the night it actually opened. It had been revamped by Jim and the members then of the Guild Theatre from, I think it was a billiard hall. I had joined just before it opened, having seen an advertisement out the front. I was a shy 19-year-old, or maybe I was 18, I've forgotten, with a slight stammer, who found it difficult to speak at fellowship at the St Andrew's Presbyterian Church where we married, and I thought it would do me good. It did. I doubt I've shut up since. Jim was in the opening play, and I was thrilled to be down there handing out programs in the foyer, which was then tiny because the theatre has been revamped several times since. I don't recall having met him. I do recall seeing him on stage, and perhaps what I thought is best not see it. And I don't recall any later actual meeting, but there was one, obviously. He had belonged for some years. He'd also belonged to the Rockdale Musical Society, which is how the Guild started, as a break-off group. I hadn't. Somehow, when I thought of that last night, I haven't, and I've never been able to visualise my husband, whom you all knew so well, hoofing it in the chorus. But apparently he did. That probably shows my limits, not his. I grew up in a house my father built in Bexley. In the 50s, things were very tight. He wasn't an ex-serviceman. He worked on radar, so there was no extra money for him. Jim grew up in Brighton, in a classic blue brick house built in the 30s, which is unusual. It was Depression, and they moved into it shortly after they married, his parents. The Guild Theatre was our local place, our meeting place, something to do in a time when there was very little to do other than church. The next few years at the Guild, Jim and I crabbed a bit. Or he crabbed. I was really too shy. How things changed later. While working on set building, painting, and about managing the theatre, I was always being told to clean the ashtrays and the butt boxes. He would say, "They're probably yours anyway, Christine." I was a big smoker in those days. I was prepared to secretly borrow from my dad's huge tool collection, since he built the house, just to be helpful and to be accepted with the set building and the theatre maintenance. I worked very hard to be accepted. We both did. I will say no more on that particular episode. He went overseas, we corresponded. He lived in a small flat and made a few lifelong friends. Eventually, as Bob said, he travelled. He came home in 1969 at Christmas, came to a party at our house and brought me a present, which I still have, from Sweden. We were married on the 16th of May, 1970. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, really the day before he died. It was to have been a big after-show party because it would have been in the second week of my production of Crown Matrimonial, which Jim, of course, as usual, did the set for. And we had a few argy-bargies, as we always did when he did my set. which were friendly and negotiated settlements. We joked one another during COVID that we were going to both just make it over the line because we realised how tired we were and that we were getting a bit frail. But we had a lovely family dinner. It was so good to be able to see and hug our grandchildren again and get close to our sons and their wives. And it was thrilling for him. 5 days after his death, or before his death, he was writing an architectural response for a new development concept at the theatre block that we're in at Rockdale, intended for the guild representatives, 2 of whom are here today, to offer Bayside Council. And he wrote quite a lot of plays, several in fact, short ones, and one big one that he'd started, sitting across the breakfast table from me because I had moaned about him always being upstairs in his study writing. He wrote new lyrics for a song for me or us to sing because we thought for a bit it was just going to be us 2 because they hadn't lifted the limits you could have. It was Sondheim, no less. I am not a singer, but I gave it my best shot, which is a kind thing to say to myself. He started writing these lyrics. It was something he liked to attempt to do. We were lucky that we had that time with our children and our grandchildren. Jim went to Sydney Boys High, as did his sons, where he made lifelong friends, a few of whom are still in touch, and one is here today. Stan is looking at it in England. Jim was at Sydney University very young, younger than most of his cohort, because in those days they bumped you up a grade if you were becoming troublesome because you weren't paying attention because you were too bright, you already could do that. He was shy, and I've always thought that sort of thing makes a problem because you're not mature enough, really, to be coping with that level. But he enjoyed his university days when architecture was, I think, a 6-year degree and involved model building, work experience. His friends were still in touch with him. Some are here today. Thank you. And we used to meet up when the Singapore ones came over for Yum Cha, and I was kindly included, and I really enjoyed that. When we went to Singapore, we saw them. About this time of our marriage in 1970, there was a movement to G up Australian theatre and plays. It was the time of Whitlam and a big Aussie movement. Jim had written a play called The Lucky Streak, and it was in the first season of Australian plays held at Jane Street in Kensington, just behind the University of New South Wales. Some Guilders members went, and I included myself. After we married, Currency Press set up, and Aussie plays were published. We lived in Bondi Junction then, and we sat in the press owners' drawing room, talking about what they were going to do next and how difficult it all was. But I think there was a grant from the government for this publishing adventure for purely Australian plays and budding playwrights who were there often with us. Dorothy Hewitt, Peter Cannar, for example. Jim had a great love of building, and he built me a beautiful house overlooking trees and a creek in North Ryde on a battle axe block, and I brought my 2 baby sons home to it. He had no time to write then. He was always building decks and things like that and working extra. But he took it up, the writing, later in life. He did a lot of his time here, writing and doing other things. Various aspects of his life included architecture, which he had decided he wanted to be in as a child. Jim designed and supervised the build of churches, shopping centres, Blacktown Workers Club, a prison, a retirement village in Queensland before the days of CAD. I think that's what you call it, CAD, makes architecture easier. He built a huge nursing home just while we were getting married. The nuns up there were great fun, as was the father. The nuns ran a book on whether he would be on time for the first meeting after our honeymoon. They were paying out, apparently. They were a fun bunch. He built a morgue, lovely residential renovations, and a few houses. He used to joke that he covered God and mammon in his trade. Now, I didn't paginate these, so you can talk quietly amongst yourselves while I work out where I am. We joined the Society for Growing Australian Plants, but nothing much grew at our place at North Ryde. It was all too heavy a soil, but he kept on trying. The Guild remained a huge part of his world. He contributed to it for all of his life. I think certainly and I wonder if his sons ever felt we took second place. He loved building sets, production management, etc. He wrote several plays for Short and Sweet, which were done. I produced one of them. His Christmas card started in 1990, I think, the year we moved to Paddo, now named the Muchtonia Centennial Park. He started these really to tell friends and colleagues that we'd moved and that he had started his own little practice. So were fun works of art, really. There's one or two on the coffin, which if you haven't seen already, please look at. It's a beautiful work of art, designed by Nick's wife, and with the boys having huge input, and me being allowed to say yes or no. I don't know if they always took notice, but they were usually very good to me. He biked. He took up biking about 25 years ago, biking to Cronulla or La Perouse to ride and then riding back after a swim. He went on various tours with his bike group, including from Sydney to Brisbane, to Uluru and Sydney to the Gong. He sat on the Rockdale Council committees, including one to find ways of improving the main shopping centre. He sent suggestions to Bayside Council, some of which they accepted. He joined Amnesty and wrote letters to have political prisoners released and get up to work for political and social change. As soon as we moved to Paddo, we volunteered for Clover Moore. We had always said if we moved back to the eastern suburbs, she was the best thing going, and we would go and help. She was first in the seat of Bligh and then as Mayor of Sydney, and we worked for all those elections. We also volunteered for Alex Greenwich's first two elections because we believed in what he stood for and wanted it to remain independent. His boys were at high school, his school, where he helped park cars in busy cricket and football seasons for school funds and act as his dad for the weekend sleepovers for the rowers. Later, his big interest was his grandchildren, all 5 of whom he loved unconditionally, and he was so proud. His dogs, they'd always started off as mine, but they very soon preferred him. He had an unfidgety lap, and he chose more interesting walks than I did. And he loved me. He supported me in my endeavours, productions, etc., even if he didn't really like the plays I'd chosen, or if he ticked me off if I worked too hard, and he never said anything if I became crabby with tiredness or ill health. Just a sigh. We were thankful for the COVID lockdown. We rested from our busy lives, we napped, we walked in the park with our dog, we started to tidy up our messy house when we realised we had to move. It was just too big for us as we aged. Well, we almost tidied up, and we almost got to terms with our ageing, not quite. We had fun, we laughed, we ate patchy, thrown together meals of leftovers because we couldn't be bothered. We drank some very nice wine. And we worried together over the future for our grandchildren. We sang songs from musicals and generally relaxed. We watched Shakespeare on YouTube and Sondheim's 90th birthday celebration on YouTube, which is why the Sondheim song, I think. And Jim chatted with others so happily on social media and texted. I'd be watching something and look over and a little smile on his face going tick, 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 tap, tap, tap. Thank you to all those people who did that for him. He really enjoyed it. We watched DVDs on old films and TV shows that we'd watched 1 or even 2 times. The Death of Stalin, Atypical, and presciently Afterlife. We worried aloud. We worried about our blood family and the guild's future. All in a few COVID weeks, then it ended. I'm supposed to have a bit of second sight from my Scottish ancestors. I had no second sight. I had none at all, a blessing perhaps. My thanks to the staff of St. Vincent's. They are expert, amazing and caring. They have a great work culture. You couldn't run the sort of thing they do without it. We were only public patients. We never let go of Medicare. So never let go of Medicare, my friends. We dipped out of private health when our boys left home. We couldn't see the point. It had been set up by a Labor government and we believed in it very much. No country in the world, in my view, has such an excellent system. Nowhere could you even buy what we had for Jim at this time, or I had experienced earlier. We looked at it as our Australian birthright. Thank you for your patient attention. It was too long, but you're kind enough to look interested.
The house I grew up in was, in the words of the late great John Clarke, a split-level, ultra-modern dream home. It had the lot, circa 1970. Sunken living room. Cork floors. A milk chocolate shag pile. Wallpaper that seemed to vibrate before your very eyes. Window frames of red cedar so soft you could sink your fingernails into them, and I really shouldn't have. And a colour television. Oh. Mum and Dad won it in a soccer raffle. The only thing they've ever won, they'd say. I disagree. We were lucky. I didn't know any other kids whose dad had designed and built their own split-level ultra-modern dream home. And the luck kept coming. We grew up in a quiet street. We rode bikes. We played in the bush. We climbed trees. Had adventures along Kitty's Creek that Dad used to take us on. We had a pool, an upstairs extension. We rode our luck. And in this lucky home, among the many books on the shelves, was a play called The Lucky Streak. And it had a big photo of my dad on the back. It was definitely Dad. No one looked like my dad. Those teeth, those eyes, the black hair, went to grey later. And there was a reason his photo was on it. He wrote this play, The Lucky Streak. Now, I've had a bit of a lucky streak myself. I was lucky to have had such a dad. He was thoughtful, enigmatic, quietly outrageous, humbly hilarious, and genuinely casual. He liked date and cream cheese sandwiches. He liked collecting 50-cent pieces. He liked to eat green apples with a plate of table salt. Hey, just dip that thing in there. Get those teeth to work. But so much of life is private, internal, or intimate, and immediate. It's lived in moments of choice and action. Any obituary can hope but to just capture the obvious peaks or troughs. There are a few stories that help us glimpse the real Jim. My wife, Christina, tells a story about being on a building site with Dad when she was working as his sort of second person. And the builder was discussing how some detail should be done. Oh, Jim, we'll do it this way. We'll put it up here and this will go through here and we'll just punch it through, it'll be fine. And Dad listened very politely and said, no, you'll do it like this. It's curious to think of Dad being like that, but that's how he was when he was in charge. And that was Dad, and Dad was lucky. Sure, he also worked hard. He was thorough and deliberate and cautious and determined. But Dad and I, and lots of us, are born with the kind of luck that no amount of hard work or thoroughness, deliberation or caution will bring. What do we do with our luck? My dad took his luck and invested it in a relationship that lasted 50 years, in bringing up children and grandchildren. He invested his luck in kindness, in charity, in respect, in building and maintaining his theatre and the community that surrounds it. I could have half the money and half the stuff and still be lucky. Not everyone in the world is as lucky. Those of us with all the luck we need to share. I'll leave you with one dream that Dad told me about a year or so ago. And he said, I don't have many dreams. And his granddaughter, Searle, was telling him about a dream that she had. And he said, I only remember having one dream. I'm living in a house full of cats. And these cats need to be returned to the library. But they won't stay in the library bag. I love you, Dad. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're nearly done. Everyone complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Now, this was the sort of joke that my father would make regularly. Those flashes of merriment that would want to set the whole table on a roar. And Dad's jokes were usually ones that he came up with himself on the spur of the moment, unlike that weather joke, which is attributed to Mark Twain, but was written by someone else. It's a good reminder that, as Twain himself is supposed to have said, you shouldn't believe all the quotes that you read on the internet. But moving beyond the weather, much is said, too much really, about work-life balance. And yet, nobody really does anything about it. We live in a world where too many people are expected to devote themselves to work from dawn to dusk and to fit their life around whatever slivers of time remain. Now, my dad did not subscribe to this philosophy. Despite being a hard worker, despite striving for excellence in everything he did, despite at times being expected to work very long hours, even when he began his own business and everything hinged on him being able to make money at that, he did not see that work had to come before everything else. Dad lived by the principle that life, your interests, your community, your family, come before work. Now, in any areas of interest, there are people who dabble and there are people who have a passion. And those who have a passion, when you have a passion for something, when you put your effort into it, it doesn't tire you out as much as it ought to. It energizes you. It gives you the enthusiasm, the drive to keep going. And if, like Dad and like myself, we are very much cut from the same cloth, you're the sort of person who might struggle to start conversations with people. You might be a bit shy about making friends. It's worth knowing that when you spend time on the things that you're passionate about, that creates structures and opportunities to connect with others, to make friends. Dad's passions were always creative ones: writing, designing, making theatre. He felt guilty later in life about being a bit distant from his kids and during our early lives, his head having been too full of scripts and sets and sound cues and decks and garage roofs. But although he was not always as involved as some dads are, particularly today, he was always kind. He was always supportive. He was always willing to reach out and be part of our lives. He was always there on opening night of a show that we were involved in. I found it very hard to relate to the movie trope of the dad who can't get to the school in time for the school play or the baseball game. Dad's always turned up. I don't have a lot of stories that really capture how Dad lived his life, how how our relationship functioned. When I was maybe 8 or 9, Dad took me to a trial session of little athletics. And naturally I was terrible. As indeed was the case with any kind of sport I tried to take up. And so the very first thing I did at this event, the other boys in this group of people I've never met before reacted by the natural phenomenon of hurling scorn and abuse at the new kid. And I ran off the field in tears. And I was wondering as I was rushing off, what is Dad going to say? Is he even going to be around? But there he was. And when I choked out the story to him, he didn't say, boys shouldn't cry, anything else from the toxic masculinity playbook. He just said, well, if the coaches are allowing that sort of thing, that's not really a place where we want to be. And so we left. Now, once my brother and I got around to providing some, Dad absolutely loved his grandkids. His face lit up whenever he saw them. Right from the start, he wanted to be involved in their lives, to not miss out as much this time around. He particularly loved seeing Julie, Ezelle and Tom and Charlotte doing things, playing when they were very little and watching them perform when they were older. Dad was often shy, but he was never shy about praising the talents of his grandchildren. In 2008, a few weeks before Dad's 70th birthday, my son Edgar was formally diagnosed with autistic disorder. For years, Edgar didn't enjoy playing with toys, opening presents, being part of family gatherings. From an early age, what he enjoyed was riding on trains, while calling out simulated train announcements of his own and alert sounds and other things of that nature, loudly and repeatedly, and occasionally rushing off to do all of the same things in a different carriage. Not many people were keen to share this activity with this odd little boy. But my dad was willing to do that, and they spent many hours together. Now, maybe Dad did this out of a belief that if you support people in their passions, that helps you to forge connections with them. Or maybe it was just his patience, his kindness, his generosity of spirit, and his love for his grandkids. Either way, I will always be grateful. Edgar chose to go to school rather than come here today, although he was invited, but he was devastated to lose his grandpa. He did want to try and write a eulogy to record for me to play on his behalf, but he didn't finish. Instead, I'm going to read the text that he sent to Dad's phone shortly after learning that Dad had died. Grandpa, you were very good to the family and a good director at the Guild Theatre. I will never forget you. Crying face emoji.
going to invite Guild members Anne and Greg to come forward.
A reading from, I've gone blank, Ecclesiastes, sorry. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity. For that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labour which thou dost taketh under the sun. For no one knoweth not his time.
A little Shakespeare in a church. So, Jim, who would have thunk? It's an extract from Shakespeare's comedy, As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 7, and it's spoken by the cynical and grouchy character of Jacques, referring to the 7 ages of man. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. And then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with speckles on nose and pouch on side. His youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank. And his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange and eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.
I sense, perhaps strangely, even though Shakespeare might sound unusual in a church, the author of Ecclesiastes, and Shakespeare would have agreed on many things. Why? Well, in their own way, both actually had a different stage and a different audience. And through these people, separated though they were by a couple of thousand years, both seemed to understand the need to embrace the fullness of life in the here and in the now. All the world is a stage, says Shakespeare, and all of us play many parts. Parts that encompass all the realms of human emotion and possibility. Just think of the characters we find in As You Like It alone. Let alone the full range of Shakespeare's plays, comedies, tragedies, histories. So why not play them? Why not play these parts, I suspect Shakespeare would say. But of course, Shakespeare himself does not say that. We see that through a full range of characters. Through heroines, through heroes, but also through their contrasting opposites, so that we get this full impact of human goodness. Ecclesiastes is the same. Go thy way, eat thy bread, and with a merry heart live joyfully. Don't just live, but embrace life in its fullness, because we don't know when we will die. But perhaps much more importantly, because there is so much to live for. There is much under the sun, if only we would seek to see it. I think we have all learnt that in this time of COVID more than ever. There is so much under the sun. Life is much fuller than we knew, both because of all the things we miss through isolation, but also because of all the things we discover that we took for granted. But for you right now, I know that the world feels less and lacking because Jim is not here. And I'm not going to tell you that for many of you that sense of life as less will ever go away, because it won't. And to be honest, I don't think you would want it to, even if it could, because that sense of loss is a sign of love. It is actually a sign of full life. But there's one thing I can assure you of here, and that is that you are all more. Your lives are so much more because Jim was here. And I can assure you that the world is a richer place because of him, because I have had the joy and the gift of seeing that truth in his family over the past few days. And I can see it in all of you gathered here. The world is always more because of each of us, those past, those present, and those who will be into the future. This is the truth that we know. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, drink thy wine, and with a merry heart live joyfully, because all the world is a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They all have their exits and their interests, and one man in his time plays many parts. Amen. I'm now going to invite Searle to come forward.
First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the refugees, and I did not speak out, because I was not a refugee. Then they came and took our reef, and I did not speak out. I pursed my lips and warmed my hands with their fire. They took the young, the old, ripping their signs away, silencing generations with cold, hard cash and calloused cries. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out.
We're going to watch some beautiful pictures from Jim's life that tell us his story, as we also listen to some beautiful music as time goes by. If you would like to, we're going to allow some time now just for people to come forward. If you would like to say your final goodbye, I would invite, we're going to play some music, invite the family to come forward first, and then those of you who would like to, just remembering to watch our need for physical distancing. Let's take some time now to come forward and admire this beautiful work of art as well. as you return to your seats. We're going to play one of Jim's favourite songs, We Are Australian. I'm told that he would sing this loudly every time he heard it, but in this instance I'm going to ask you to sing along with your hearts, because sadly at this time we can't allow us to sing loudly with our voices. So let's listen to that beautiful song, We Are Australian.
We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands that we come, we share a dream, and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian, we are one. But we are many, and from all the lands that we come, we share a dream, and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian, we are Australian.
We now come to our time of farewell. In a moment, I'm going to move forward so that we can say our final goodbyes, as they will be said here in this place, because of course goodbyes don't need to ever end. After the blessing, I will lead you out of this place. I would ask that you wait until Jim's family follow through. And once outside, we request that rather than gathering outside, you actually move yourself right down along Oxford Street, so that you are spread down at least a whole block, where we can make quite a spectacle as we farewell Jim by walking him slowly down the street. None of us knows what lies beyond the grave. Some of us believe that there is life beyond this life, an encounter with the living God. But in his letter to the apostles in Corinth, the Apostle Paul says that this life is as different from that of a fully grown plant is from a seed from which it grew. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, a Persian polymath, philosopher, physician, scientist, and Islamic theologian, reminds us that bodies of matter cannot ever disappear completely. They only change their form and condition and composition and colour and turn into a different complex, elementary piece of matter. Some of us believe that this life is all we have, and that we are called to live it as fully as possible, fully human, fully alive to God's purposes. Whatever we believe, we can believe that Jim is at peace. He is at peace from the troubles of this world. He is at peace with us. He is at peace with God. We will remember Jim and the special relationship he had with each of us. Jim, we respect you on this journey of life. Let us pray. God of hope, living God, above us, beneath us, behind us, and before us, we commend our friend Jim to your care. And we commit his body to be cremated earth to earth ashes to ashes, dust to dust, placing our confidence in the mercy and love that there is something beyond our mortal lives, because we know that though we may die, all that was us goes on to be something new, just as you did. Lord, we do not know whether our days will be few or many. Help us to live each day with something of worth and kindness, integrity, courage, creativity and love, just as Jim did during his life. These are the signs of your Spirit's work amongst us. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. The time has come to leave this place. So go now, glad that you have loved, free to grieve for Jim, free to hold each other in your human frailty, and free to cherish his memory and to find new ways to include him in your lives. My friends, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make God's face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up God's countenance upon you and to give you peace.